Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine, back again with another installment in our Remedy Connected Universe series here on Hidden Machine. Now, this video is taken from a larger video published late last year that breaks down the entire Remedy Connected Universe, but it's 3 hours long. So we're taking it, breaking it down into chunks, and delivering it back here to you with a little explanation at the front end from me, Matt, the guy who made that video. Today, we're going to be looking at 2019's Control. Now, this is a fan favorite. I know this game has a huge community. A lot of folks who love Control aren't really that connected to the Remedy Connected Universe. And, you know, I totally understand that the game has a very strong aesthetic and very strong characters. And it's just, there's so much to think about. You know, that sounds kind of goofy, but it's the kind of game and the kind of storytelling that leads you to kind of continue a lot of things in your own imagination. And there's a lot of fan fiction, there's a lot of fan art, and a really, really, really dedicated fan community. This is a very strong game. Today, we're going to look at a bit about the development and the background of the game, and we'll introduce it, and then we'll give a plot breakdown, where we're going to talk about the story of Control, the main game, before we get into the DLCs and a full analysis of how it all connects back to the greater Remedy Connected Universe. Now, if you've missed our previous videos, we've been covering Death Rally, Max Payne 1, Max Payne 2, Alan Wake, Quantum Break, talking about all the supplemental materials, the TV shows, the books, the videos, the blogs, everything. All of the things that make the Remedy Connected Universe. We're talking about the gameplay, the mechanics, the themes, the meta-narratives, everything, and swirling it all together into a sort of broth, we'll say, and then we're drinking it down. So we've got a lot of the stuff out of the way. We've talked a lot about everything that came before Control, but today we're talking about Control. So if you want to get up to speed, make sure you check out the other videos in this series. And with that said, let's get into today's video, Control.
August 4th, 1964. Bureau agents discover the oldest house investigating an altered world event case in the New York City subway tunnels. It's a place of power. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary building, a brutalist skyscraper. But inside, it breaks the laws of our reality, unstable, mad, and shifting. There are rooms in the building where other dimensions leak in. We call these rooms thresholds. There is a connection between our minds and the unknown, often hostile forces intruding on our world. These forces gravitate toward everyday objects, a gun, a television, a house with a reputation of being haunted. So somehow, we affect these events. We're holding the key, but we don't have a clue on how to use it. We're dealing with dangerous, unknown forces here. What's the cause and what's the effect? Are we the starting point, or just a necessary evil in this? We're on a mission to find answers to these questions. Or die trying. This is Zachariah Trench, the director of the Federal Bureau of Control.
As a game, Control really builds a lot on what was offered in Quantum Break. Combat is tighter and more focused, with an increase in the number and variety of abilities on offer to the player. Lore and narrative are still presented through a number of different mediums, although some narrative bits, specifically the live action videos found throughout the game, are initially presented to players in a shortened form, allowing for casual players to quickly get any crucial information that the videos may present. Once a player encounters a video, they can access it again from a menu and watch it in full. These videos are never more than a minute or two long, but the full versions offer a lot to players who are excited to dig deeper into the mysteries of Control. The video lore segments in Control have a style that feels like a very refined mashup of both the TV shows, and the spoken word narration that players would find in Max Payne and Alan Wake. This effect is heightened by the fact that the voice actors for both Max Payne and Alan Wake have prominent roles in Control. The player takes on the role of Jessie Faden. When she was a child, Jessie and her brother Dylan lived in the town of Ordinary. The two would sometimes play with their friends in a local landfill. One day at the landfill, they found a magical slide projector with a small collection of slides. When placed into the slide projector, these slides would open up portals to other dimensions. The children began to explore these dimensions, or slidescapes, and it all seemed harmless enough at first. In one of the slidescapes, Jessie and her brother made contact with a seemingly friendly entity that they named Polaris. Over time, things got out of hand. Entities from inside of the other dimensions began to negatively affect reality. All of the adults in Ordinary disappeared one day, and some of the town's children had been turned violent by an entity called the Knot Mother. With Polaris' help, Jessie and Dylan were able to turn off the slide projector. They burned all of the slides except for the slide that Polaris came from. What happened in Ordinary with the slide projector is called an Altered World Event, or an AWE. Altered World events and other paranatural phenomena are investigated by a branch of the US government known as the Federal Bureau of Control. FBC agents arrived in Ordinary shortly after the slide projector was turned off. They confiscated the projector and its remaining slide and attempted to detain both Jessie and Dylan Faden. Jessie was able to escape, but Dylan was taken by the FBC to their headquarters in New York City. The Bureau operates out of a building called the Oldest House. The game opens up 17 years after the Ordinary AWE. Jessie, with the help of Polaris, who she has a sort of telepathic connection to, has finally found the FBC headquarters. Jessie spent the previous 17 years trying to find out what happened to her brother Dylan, and it appears that she's finally about to get some answers. The Oldest House itself is a paranatural phenomenon, a constantly shifting place that contains all sorts of mysteries. As I said before, the FBC investigates the paranatural. Paranatural meaning anything that violates the known laws of nature and reality. They work to contain, study, and ultimately control these elements. Individuals with paranatural abilities are called para-utilitarians. Objects that have paranatural connections are either altered items or objects of power. An altered item has been touched by the paranatural in some way, and as such will have unique and sometimes dangerous qualities. Some might recognize these items as being possessed, not entirely different from the possessed objects that we encountered in Alan Wake. Objects of power are different than that in that they are connected to the astral plane. The astral plane is a complex and mysterious dimension, one that the FBC is still struggling to fully understand. Alan Wake mentions that the dark place is full of different entities, some of which have made attempts to enter reality. The dark presence that he battles is just one of those entities. Like the dark place, the astral plane is also inhabited by entities. One of these entities takes the form of a large black pyramid and is called the Board. The Board has a very unique connection to the FBC and its use of objects of power. Through rituals that take place in the astral plane, the Board can help certain para-utilitarians bind to objects of power. Once the ritual is done, the para-utilitarian can then utilize the powers attached to that object of power. While it's unclear to many how the Board operates and whether or not it's a collection of entities or just one being, the Board uses one of these binding rituals to appoint the director of the FBC. The director ritual has to do with the service weapon, an object of power that generally takes the shape of a handgun. When Jessie arrives at the Oldest House, she is met by a janitor named Ati. Ati directs Jessie to the director's office. She walks in to find the corpse of recently deceased former FBC director Zachariah Trench, who apparently suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. She is compelled to pick up the gun that lies next to Trench's body and is sent to the astral plane to partake in a binding ritual, as the gun that she picked up is the aforementioned service weapon. Upon successful completion of the ritual, the board declares that Jesse is the new director of the FBC. The game's lore indicates that failure to complete the binding ritual does result in the immediate death of the person who picked up the weapon. Jesse's accomplishment here is similar to having been able to pull Excalibur from its stone, and it sets her on her hero's journey. As she exits the office, she is attacked by human-like creatures. These are the game's main enemies, former FBC employees who have been corrupted by a force known as the Hiss. Well, to a degree they do resemble the Taken from Alan Wake. The Hiss seems to mutate individuals in all sorts of horrifying ways. After taking on a few more Hiss-corrupted individuals, Jesse finds and cleanses a control point. The game doesn't immediately explain this, but control points are essentially points in the oldest house that help the building to maintain stability. They're sort of one part talisman and one part science, and were created in the 1960s by former head of research Dr. Theodore Ashe Jr. An acting director can cleanse control points, and clean control points will help to prevent unexpected shifts in the house. Without these control points, the house would become a never-ending labyrinth that would eventually swallow up everyone inside of it. Control points are also used as tethers for the board to connect to the oldest house. In terms of gameplay, that means that the player can use these spots to regenerate health, craft different mods and upgrades, change outfits, take on board-specific side missions, and fast travel to other control points. Jesse eventually finds some FBC employees who have not been affected by the Hiss, and among them is Emily Pope, who is the acting head of research at the FBC. Emily is surprised by Jesse's ability to cleanse the Hiss from the control points, and is even more surprised to learn that Jesse is able to teleport between control points, which is something that no previous FBC director had been able to do. The reason that Emily and the other survivors haven't been corrupted by the Hiss is because they are wearing devices called Hadron Resonance Amplifiers, or HRAs. Think of them as life jackets to be worn as the building is flooded by the Hiss resonance. These devices were developed and distributed by the most recent head of research at the Bureau, Dr. Casper Darling, who has since gone missing. Something within Jesse is resisting the Hiss corruption, so she doesn't need to wear an HRA to stay safe. Emily Pope tells Jesse about an object of power called the Hotline, a telephone, which when bound to the director, allows them to communicate directly with the board. Jesse heads out to find the Hotline, and this is where the game really picks up. From here on out, Control is sort of an open world game, which is something that Remedy attempted with early builds of Alan Wake. The main quest is fairly linear, but there are a number of side missions available to the player as well that work to flesh out the FBC, the oldest house, and its current inhabitants. The situation with the Hiss put the oldest house under lockdown, so no one is able to enter or exit the building until the Hiss has been eradicated. If the Hiss were to escape the oldest house and infect the world, it'd be catastrophic. Despite the lockdown, Jesse does travel to the astral plane from time to time, and we get a few glimpses of other dimensions as well. Throughout the story, Jesse attempts to restore order to the oldest house, but along the way, she finds that a large amount of the staff and sector heads have been corrupted by the Hiss. While Jesse is able to cleanse the Hiss from control points, it seems that attempting to cleanse the Hiss from people is possibly fatal. We see Jesse try to cleanse a Hiss-corrupted employee of the FBC, and they disappear, very similar to the way the Taken would disappear when defeated by Alan Wake. Exactly what it is that happens to defeated Taken or Hiss-corrupted individuals is never really explained in either game. Their bodies simply disappear, and their fate is never really made clear to the players or the player character. However, it's an interesting contrast to what happens to the enemies in Max Payne, a game where the protagonist is essentially a mass murderer. Jesse does eventually reunite with Dylan, who has been held at the oldest house since the FBC first detained him. Unfortunately, Dylan has also been corrupted by the Hiss. The plot of Control takes many twists and turns, which at this point should be expected from a Remedy game. While the main storyline concerns Jessie fulfilling her duties as director and clearing out the Hiss, the game uses all of the familiar storytelling tools we've seen in previous games to greatly expand on the history of the FBC. The Bureau has been around for a long time, and through documents, audio and video recordings, conversations, and missions, we can learn a lot about the staff, the power dynamics, politics, struggles, origins, and mysteries of the Bureau and the oldest house. We'd be here for days if I got too deep into all of that, so let's just briefly summarize the events of the game before explaining how Control fits into the Remedy connected universe. To begin to understand the story of Control, you need to understand that the Hiss is a resonance. Resonance is the term that the Bureau uses to refer to paranatural energies and their frequencies. When the Hiss corrupts an individual, they begin chanting a sort of incantation. As more and more corrupted individuals repeat this chant, the resonance of the Hiss grows louder and stronger. After bringing the slide projector back to the oldest house after the AWE event in Ordinary, former director Zachariah Trench and the former head of research, Dr. Casper Darling, who are portrayed by James McCaffrey and Matthew Peretta, respectively, began organizing expeditions into the one remaining slide, which they called Slidescape 36. They became aware of a powerful resonance in the slidescape and began to search for the source of it. During one of these expeditions, Director Trench unknowingly came into contact with the Hiss resonance, and it slowly started to manifest itself inside of him. At the time, he described it as a sound, like a needle, drilling in, cutting through his containment suit, reverberating in the base of his skull, his whole being. Dr. Darling ran tests on Trench, but couldn't find anything amiss. On top of this, Darling and all the research team didn't find evidence of any other resonances aside from the one that they were searching for, so Trench's concerns were dismissed. While they were unable to find the source of the resonance inside of Slidescape 36, they did find an enormous structure that acted as a sort of host or catalyst for the resonance. Casper Darling named it Hedron due to its shape, and it was brought back to the oldest house to be examined. The Bureau had never encountered anything as powerful as the Hedron resonance, and Darling became obsessed with it and the possibilities of what it could do for the Bureau. All the while, tensions between Trench and Darling were on the rise. Trench was becoming more and more paranoid and suspicious of both Darling and Hedron. This was due to the fact that Trench was becoming corrupted by the Hiss resonance. When the FBC collected the slide projector from Ordinary, it was believed that Slidescape 36 was the only slide left. However, Trench secretly found and kept the burnt remains of one of the other slides. The Hiss resonance inside of Trench was making him fearful of Hedron, and he was eventually compelled to take the slide projector and use the burnt slide to fully welcome the Hiss resonance into the oldest house. Although we never really get the full picture, it's implied that the Hedron resonance is at war with the Hiss resonance. It seems that the Hedron resonance is capable of pushing back or drowning out the Hiss resonance. The Hedron resonance was somehow aware of what was brewing inside of Trench, and it communicated this to Dr. Darling. Hedron then instructed Darling on how to create the HRAs. As we discussed earlier, the HRAs keep people from becoming corrupted by the Hiss. This is because the HRAs take the Hedron resonance and amplify it around the people who are wearing them. We also discussed earlier that Jesse doesn't need an HRA. This is because Polaris and Hedron share the same resonance. As long as Jesse is connected to Polaris, the resonance will protect her from the Hiss. If this seems a bit confusing, that's because it is. The true nature of Polaris and Hedron are intentionally left a bit murky to the player, and it's unclear if Hedron and Polaris are separate entities bound by a shared resonance, or if the resonance is just one entity that can take multiple forms, or manifest itself in different hosts. Regardless, it's through her connection to Polaris that Jessie is eventually able to once again turn off the slide projector and stop the Hiss invasion. She attempts to cleanse her brother Dylan of the Hiss, but the trauma of the event leaves him in a coma. At the end of the game, Jessie is feeling more confident in her role as director, and is working to rid the last of the Hiss from the oldest house. The game does leave a few loose ends, such as the whereabouts of Dr. Darling and the fate of Dylan Faden, but I suspect that these things will be addressed in a future Control game.